In this lesson, we're going to take a look at a question from a student in my Spring Boot Introduction course. If you'd like to take this course for 50% off, please use the link below. With that, let's get to the question. So the question is simply this. The student has a regular web MVC application, a Spring Boot web app, and they have some JSON data. And the question is, how can I take this JSON data and insert it into the DB? So that's exactly what we're going to do today. We're going to start from scratch, create a new Spring Boot project. We'll grab some dummy JSON data from one of my favorite services, and we'll take that data and insert it into an H2 database. So let's go ahead and get started. So as I said, there is this website called JSON Placeholder, which I really love, and it gives us a nice easy way to grab some kind of fake dummy data. And so today we're going to use these users, and these users, just 10 users here, and they're made up of a bunch of data. And so with that, let's go ahead and create our project. So I'm going to create a new project. And we're going to use Java 8, Spring Initializr. Let's say com.thereal and Vega. We're going to call this JSON DB. We'll use Maven, jar, Java, and we'll just go on from there. So let's take a look at what we might want. I always start with DevTools. I use web as a dependency here. Nothing else there. For SQL, as I said, we're going to use JPA and the H2 database. And I think for ops, I don't think we need anything. Let's just go ahead and throw that in. Oh, I wanted something else here. How about Lombok? Always makes my life easier. I love Lombok. So let's go ahead and hit next. Let's go ahead and throw this in boot, JSON DB, and we'll finish. Okay, create. All right, so while that's firing up here, let's go back here. I'm going to grab this data. And inside of here, where I want to put my data is in source main resources. I'm just going to create a new folder here. So we'll say new directory. We'll just call it JSON. And we're going to say new file. users.json. So go ahead and paste that in. All right, so the next thing we want to do is we have some properties. Let me go ahead and just copy this. I'm going to copy some stuff here so you don't have to sit here and watch every little thing get typed out. So there's our properties. We're basically enabling our H2 console so we can look at that. We're changing the data source name to users, and we're enabling those endpoints if we need them. So there's our data. Now what we need to do is actually start building out our project. So what I'm going to do is come in here. Let's start here with main. And let's just start to build this out. So we're going to need a couple packages. So I'm going to go package, controller, go back up, Command N, start typing package. Just a little shortcut to get started with everything. So I have a domain, I have package repository, and then back up, package, service, and that should do us. Okay, so let's just start this one by one. We're going to have a user controller, so let's start with Java class. We'll call this user controller. And inside of our controller here, this is going to be a REST controller. We're going to have a request mapping of /users. All right, so let's start there. And then I like to kind of build my applications out from my starting point. So I'm going to have a user controller, but I know that I don't want to put business logic in here. So what I end up doing is creating a service. Most of the time I create a interface and an implementation. Today we'll just keep it short just for demo purposes. So what I do is I start here and say, all right, well, I'm going to need a user service, and it's going to be called user service. But as we can see, we don't have a type for user service. So if we come in here, we can create a class called user service, and we can tell it where it's going to go. So in this case, it's going to go in our service package, and we'll go ahead and hit OK. Now in my, let's go back here. So now that we have that, I can actually create a constructor. So I'm going to create a constructor, and inside there, we're going to get our user service. And finally, I'm going to have one more get mapping, and this is going to be for list. And what we're going to do here is we're going to get an iterable of users. We haven't defined that yet. And we'll get a list back. And to do that, we're going to use our user service, and we're going to use a method called list. So again, we're here. We already have our user service. We could come in here and say create method list. And so now it creates a method for us inside of our user service class. I always forget to use service here, so we'll do that. So next is our service class. So we're gonna need some stuff in here, and to do that, we're actually gonna need our repositories. But before we get into the repository, we're gonna actually have to build out our domain model, right? So let's create a new class, and we'll call it user. This is inside of our Java class. I'm sorry, this is inside of our domain package, and this is going to represent a user. And I'm gonna go ahead and start copying and pasting some stuff. Again, I know you don't want to watch me type all this, so let's go ahead and copy this in, and we'll just talk this way through. Okay, so this is entity class. This is JavaX. Okay, so we're going to start talking about this. So let's jump into back to our JSON data. So inside of here, we have an ID, name, username, email, and then we have this address block, which is basically another object inside of our object. Now we could kind of make this a relational schema, but I think to keep this simple, what we're going to just do is kind of have everything embedded and embeddable. So we'll create a new domain object called address, which is embeddable, and we'll embed that right inside of our user domain object. And all that does is create one table for all of these objects. So we'll do the same with company, and even inside of address, we'll do the same with geo. So if we look at that, we have all of our properties here, and now we have this embedded private address. So if we jump, let me go ahead and copy this as well. So inside of our domain, we're going to create a new Java class, and we'll call this address. And we'll just paste this. And we should be good there. So now again, we're going to have the same problem. We're going to need a new Java class called geo inside of here. And let's just make sure we have this right. And we'll paste this. And that's our geo class. It basically has a latitude and longitude. So that's good. And now that satisfies our address. And one more thing, we're going to need a company. And I think the company just had a few things, name, catchphrase, and BS. Not sure what that is, but maybe it is BS. All right, so let's go one more inside of here, Java class, company. I realize this is probably a little bit too much for just a simple demo, but I wanted to show this just because I like to grab this data from that website, and it's a nice example of a little bit more complex than just a simple user class. So we're just going to kind of embed everything in here. And so when we say embeddable here, this just makes this class, you're not marking this as an entity. This isn't something that's creating its own separate table. It's just saying that this class is now embeddable in somewhere else. So in our user object, we have our normal properties. We have address, which then has an embeddable object itself for geo. And then we also have company. So that, I think, satisfies our domain model. So now if we go back to our user service, we need a repository in here, right? So just come back here, and think all we needed to do. Yep. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to get a private user repository, and that's going to be called user repository, and we'll generate a constructor for that as well. And so we're going to need to create this one. So we come in here and create user repository. Again, we're going to create this in the repository package. So there that is. The only thing different here is this is an interface, and this actually extends CRUD repository. So what is the type? The type is user. The ID is of type long. So that's our user repository. That's whoa, what is this? Is going to need to pull this in, import that. Okay. Much better looking. So that's our repository. That's going to give us what we need. So now in our user service, we have a user repository. We can actually pull this in, and we need to build out our list method. And to do so, we're going to, what do we need to do here? Okay, so first off, this is actually going to take a list of user, and we'll call this users. And so the user repository can take a list and save all. So we can save a list of users at once. And that's basically going to be the JSON list of data that we get. It does not like that. Ambiguous call in CRUD repository and save. Whoops. Okay, and import list. Okay, so that will finish off our list method. Next, we're going to need a save method. Okay, so we're going to need a save method here, and we'll just say this is going to be public. This is going to return a user. We'll call it save. User. And this is just going to use the user repository. .save, and then that's a user. So I just noticed a typo. I'm just kind of doing this really fast here, so that's probably why. All right, so now I have a save method to take one user, and I have a save method to take a list of users. I don't think I actually need this. I think I was doing that for just a single demo, but I also want a iterable list of users, and I need a list method inside of here. Wait, didn't we create? Oh, that's why I just overrided that. Okay, now this is making sense. So inside of here, we're going to return a user repository. It would really help if I could type today. User repository find all. So that's just going to get us a list of them. All right, now I feel much better. So this is our save. We still have something going wrong in here. User repository. What is going wrong in here? Okay, at service, private, user repository. That's our service. That's injecting that. Domain is never used. That's fine. Aha. Return. Okay, that looks good. User service. So now back to our user controller. This is returning required. Okay, so we got to pass this in. So we need to list out. Why does it take a return list? List should not take a user. Okay, so probably just made a simple mistake here. So let's look at list. Required iterable user found iterable com dot. Did I pull in the wrong? Okay, weird. All right, so now we have our user controller. This is starting to look good. So let's talk about this. We have our user controller. We can hit /users/list and we'll get a list of users. We have our different domain objects that really just make up that one single user that's going to get stored in a user table. We have a repository for fetching our data and saving it. We have a user service that is kind of the in-between our controller and our repository, basically where we're going to house our business logic. And finally, we have our main application here. And so now here comes the fun part. So now we need to basically read in a list of JSON users, which is in our JSON users.json file. And then we need to go ahead and write them to a database. So let's kind of walk through this. So first we're going to create a bean and we're going to do a command line runner here. And this runner is going to allow us to do something right when the application starts up. And what we're going to do is we're going to inject our user service, call it user service. And this is a functional interface, so it's going to look like this. And we're going to, read JSON and write to DB. Okay, so the first thing we need is some helpers for us, and this is actually going to come in the way of Jackson. And so if we look in our Spring Boot our pom.xml here, when we pull in the web dependency, we actually get some Jackson data binding here. And inside of that Jackson data bind, there's some really good classes to help us map a particular JSON structure to an object. And so that's really what we're going to do here. And so to do that, we're going to get an object mapper. So we'll get object mapper, we'll call this mapper. And this is going to be a new object mapper. And what we're going to do with this is there's a type reference class. Actually, let me just go ahead and paste this in. You guys probably do not want to watch me type this out. So let's talk through this real quick. Import. That looks good. List users. Did we bring the wrong one in? Yeah, I don't know why I brought that in. We want... Okay, so here's our object mapper. Again, this is in the Jackson package that we brought in. And then we have a type reference. We're basically saying we want a list of users. And that's going to initialize our list of users. So we're using an input stream to basically read the JSON file. So we're going into the resources folder and grabbing JSON/users.json. And here we're going to do just a try catch. And we're going to say, all right, I want to get a list of users. We'll call that users. And it's basically going to use that object mapper, which helps us map the JSON structure to a domain object. So it's going to read the value. Here's our input stream. Here's our type reference. Here's what our type is. And then we're just using our user service, which calls our user repository, to save the users. So let's go ahead and run this and see if this works. If it does, we should see a users saved in the console. If not, it's going to say unable to save users. So as I can tell you, when I was working on this demo, there were a few times that it just wasn't quite working. And the reason for it is if that JSON structure doesn't look like that exact model of your domain, then you're going to get some errors. And there are ways around that. You can use kind of ignore, JSON ignore, and some different things, but you can come into some problems. And it looks like we already did. So no identifiers specified for entity com, invocation of init method. Okay, so basically what this is saying is that our user, we have an ID here. Strategy is embedded. Where is ID? Where is that coming from? That is our problem. So we just brought in the wrong one there. Let's try this again. All right, so unable to save users, unexpected character, maybe a non-standard comment. Yep. All right, so we can actually fix this, but an easy way to do this is to just get rid of that. And let's run it again. All right, so user saved. So let's run back to the UI. Here I am on localhost 8080. We don't have anything for there, so we're going to go to users list. And there is all of our users. So if we also want to check this out, we can go into the H2 console. Remember, we changed our data source name to users, so we're going to need to make sure we use that. There it is on our JDBC URL. We're going to connect to that. Here's our user table if we run it. So again, remember, we kind of embedded everything into that user object. So because of that, we just get this one large table. But again, for demo purposes, that was fine, just because it made a little bit more sense. So I know that was kind of a long way around what was the meat and potatoes of this presentation, which was really kind of reading and writing JSON. But I just wanted to show you from scratch, it's really not that hard. We basically build out our application like we normally would. And then back in our main application class, this is really the fun part that makes everything happen. So we're using a command line runner. We're using object mapper that's in JSON. So if we go ahead and click on this, you could see this comes from the com.fasterxml.json core. So that's all part of the mapping a JSON object to a domain object. So we're doing that, we're reading in that JSON file, and then we're just going to map our list of users over to a list of users, really. Save them off, and then we can go ahead and present them using our controller, or return them using our controller, and we can also see that from the H2 console side. So thank you for the question. I hope this helped, walking through the steps of basically reading and writing JSON to a database. And I will go ahead, and I have all of the source code up on GitHub. I'll paste a link below to that. Please, if you like this, give me that thumbs up. I like to know that these videos are helping someone out there. Subscribe to this channel, and give me some feedback. Let me know what kind of presentations / tutorials that you'd like to see, because I'm doing this for you guys. And again, if these aren't helpful, then I need to find something else to do with my time. So I hope you enjoyed this, and I will see you in the next one, friends.